Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It's Wednesday, January 15th, 2025, and we've just come back from a break, and we are now going to hear from the Department of Public Safety about their budget, and then we'll break for lunch and continue on with Human Services at 1:30 in the afternoon. So we have Daniel Batsey and Richard Hallenbeck. Is that correct? Why don't you come and take a seat? And Jim, this is yours.
Yes. Madam Chair, would you mind if I just hang back here? I have to go to the press conference at noon, so if I have to escape out a little early.
Certainly, if,
I
yeah,
have very little to add. To what
Okay.
I was going to say
that sounds fine.
other than color of support.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. And we have a bunch of new members now, so why don't we go right and introduce ourselves and then we'll turn it over to you. Right?
Hi, I'm Dave Iacoboni, representing the Lamoille, Washington District. Pleased to meet you.
Good morning and welcome. John Kosenska from the Essex Caledonia District, and I live in Burke.
Mike Nigro, Bennington Town. Tom Stevens, Washington Chittenden District.
Jim Harrison, Route 111. I live in Chittenden.
Robin Shy from Middlebury.
Tiff Bloomley from Burlington.
Trevor Squirrel, Underhill and Jericho.
Wayne Rush, Franklin 5, Highgate, Berkshire, Franklin, and Richford.
Hi, Mike Mulkey from the Wyndham 40. Putney-Domus.
Lynn Dickinson, I live in St. Albans Town.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, I'm Rick Hollenbeck, Director of Finance and Administration at the Department of Public Safety. I just wanted to let you know the Commissioner regrets that, Commissioner Morrison regrets that she couldn't be here. She did have a conflicting meeting today. But I'm here to testify along with Deputy Commissioner Daniel Batesy. This budget adjustment, just to give you to frame it, we have two different funding sources that we're projecting a deficit by the end of fiscal year 25. And so we're plugging holes in our indirect cost pool in the administration division and the criminal history record check fund in the criminal justice services division, which is the Vermont Crime Information Center is the entity that utilizes that funding source. And if there are no questions right off the top, I'm happy to jump right into the document that I shared with the committee.
That's good.
Great. So looking at the first appropriation administration, if you look down to the first account code number, 507-600 other contractual, this is moving, and I'm going to try not to skip around. We'll get to the fact is that there's things that affect both of these appropriations. There's some swapping, but so this $75,000 was previously budgeted in the Vermont Crime Information Center Special Fund, the Criminal History Record Check Fund. And what this is the Spillman legacy data. Spillman is the computer-aided dispatch records management system that the Department of Public Safety and many state law enforcement entities previously used prior to moving to Crosswind, I think 3 or 4 budgets ago. So this funding is needed to continue supplying that database, the legacy data that is needed when law enforcement has a contact. They need to be able to access those records, because we have many years of data in there that is not, none of the data from Spillman was able to be ported to Crosswind.
You have a question. I thought you were pointing at somebody.
No, no.
From there.
I mean, you're going to have that for a long time, right? Because you may have cases, old cases that you have to go back to that. Why wouldn't you just budget that as an ongoing expense, or is this based on actual time that you actually have to look back at something?
Yeah, so we did budget this but we budgeted it in the Criminal History Record Check Fund. We added that to In fiscal 23, we put that in the criminal history record check fund, but now the criminal history record check fund can't sustain that line item going forward. So I'll move to the next row down, 507, 550, the account code. This is also a contract. This is a contract with our current computer-aided dispatch records management system, the vendor being Crosswind. And this is the same situation as the one above it, Spillman. It was originally budgeted in the criminal history record check fund, and that fund can no longer sustain that line item.
So in both cases, it's not really a new expense. It's the fund doesn't have the money in it to pay for it. Right. But you're asking for general fund help to bail out that fine.
Correct.
You know, be the right choice of words, but back to.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So those are the only two that we'll get back to later in the criminal justice services budget. The operating expenses are all, the movement is all within administration. And this is related to our indirect cost pool, which is projecting a deficit at the end of the year of $1.1 million. The indirect cost pool is it's basically, we have an indirect cost rate, a federally approved rate, and that allows us to draw that rate against federal grants, special funds, interdepartmental grants. And so we draw those funds to cover the costs that are put in the pool. And the costs in the pool are costs that are generally attributable to either multiple or all programs and are ones that would be kind of difficult to break out. My position would kind of be a good example of that, in that all the programs in public safety, I would work on any number of them in the course of a day. And so to break out my time into all those awards and funding sources would be a difficult exercise. So it's costs that are attributable to all programs that end up in the pool. But we've been drawing less than we've been spending for the last few years in that fund. And so this would be the first year that we actually would have a deficit if we don't put some general funds in there. So to get to the particular line items, these are all internal service fees that we pay to other departments. Going through them, there's the state's liability insurance, Vision, which is our state financial system, the ADS allocated charge, which is the cost of basically the services that ADS provides and divides up to everybody based on a formula, and the human resources services, which is based on, I think that they charge back the actuals that they spend doing work for the Department of Public Safety.
I have a question on that one. Is that, that's a high number, and is that, if we were to look back a few years, is that a typical amount from the HR department, or have you been doing a lot of hiring or needing help, or what's creating that?
So that is pretty close to, if not the total cost of our HR. It's not an increase. So none of these are really increases. They're just shifting from interfunds to general funds because our interfund is going to end in a deficit. So none of the ones above it are the total costs, but I think that the human resources one might be, because that's pretty close to what I recall us paying for the internal service fee. And I can get back to the committee if you're interested in the particular fees and what the total costs are.
Thanks. Dr. Stevens?
But these are considered corrections to the original budget, is that right?
Correct.
And so, forgive me for being new to this process. I just want to understand on a number like 425,000, how did that get missed in the original budget? And again, I'm not sure if missed is the right word, but how did that happen through the full budgeting process to the fact that for something like human resources services, which seems to me a given, that it's this high at this time of the budgeting process?
So there's, the line items that were chosen to move were not particularly the reason why we're needing this budget adjustment. So when we look at internal service fees, they give us the number that we need to budget. And so we typically would put that in general funds and inter funds for the ones that are paid out of administration. I don't know that I have a good answer for why we didn't plug this hole in when we built 25, because we probably weren't projecting quite as large of a deficit at that time. The fund did have a significant balance, you know, as we were building that, but it's been dwindling and fluctuating.
So just to follow up on that, you made me think of something else. Under normal circumstances, would the HR department actually notice this and say something about it? I mean, would that be where the?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
The line items are built between the departments and finance and management.
Okay.
They would come up with these numbers as a target, and that's what, based on the budget request for that agency. So whatever human resources needs to fund their operation, when they have their budget developed with finance and management, they would just divide that up between the agencies on whatever.
And then Rep. Dickinson.
And so we'll have ADS in here. ADS seems to be a recurring theme.
Yeah.
In terms of billing out where they were taking a hit or where they thought that departments were not being charged enough, or we'll get an idea. But again, this is, I'm just, you know, the almost 300,000 for insurance, and then the vision charges. That's it. Just, and again, I don't have any way to judge it, so I'm just trying to understand. So it just seemed like they would be substantial budget items.
Yes,
Back in May and June.
Right. So we may want to get finance and management back in here to talk about that.
Yeah, because if they were constantly filling a hole,
Right.
and that's a broad category of filling a hole, is there something systemic that's happening here, or is it
Right.
a market-based issue?
Great. Thanks. Rep. Dickinson?
Yeah, can you tell me what the source of the interfund, that, is there a source of revenue, or I mean, is there a source of revenue that you are not collecting that is creating these shortfalls?
Yeah, it's our indirect cost pool. Based on our indirect cost rate, it's federally approved rate. And so we charge federal grants, we charge our special funds. If we bill out law enforcement services, we'll charge our indirect rate on that. We charge it on fire safety's revenue. And so the revenue has been fluctuating over the years, but you know, indirect rates have a tendency to do that. But we've been pulling in the same like $2 to $3 million every year, and costs have just gone up. Personal services costs have gone up, internal service fees costs have gone up, and they're just not able to sustain it out of that funding source. So I would also just suggest we don't look particularly at the line items as being the fault or the cause for these cost increases. I could have just as easily, I've got staff time that's charged to the indirect cost rate. It could have just as easily been that here.
Right, because, yeah, same concern is that normally if you've got costs that should be part of your regular budget, the PAA is not supposed to be the go-to place to fill in if you didn't get the money to begin. But it sounds like you didn't expect to have to come back here again.
We figure we could make it another year, but the numbers are not bearing that out right now.
Great, thank you.
Yes. And a question here.
Good morning. I guess I'm wondering. I guess I'm gonna hold off on that. Okay, I think because it's gonna take us down a rabbit hole and I don't want to do that. So I will, and I will talk.
More to come.
Yes, more to come, and I will talk with the
I'm looking
appropriate
forward
member
to
of our
this.
committee, yeah, to talk about it. Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. So wanted to continue.
Okay, so that's the end of the budget adjustment need in administration. That brings us down to criminal justice services. And as I mentioned, this was this relief to the special fund was needed based on a projected deficit by the end of the year of just over $1 million. And some of the line items that are being, we're trying to move are the BCIC director and BCIC deputy director's salary and benefits. That's $343,196. And then the others are the ones that you saw above in administration. They're coming out here. You will notice that Spillman is the same at 75,000, but Crosswind is less because that is the number that we had budgeted there. But the current year payment is actually the 702,000 that we have above in administration. So that's why those two numbers are different.
So if I'm reading this correctly, essentially the 7550, that's the Valcor system, is that what it's called?
Yes, Crosswind is the vendor.
Essentially, it's coming in, you're projecting $100,000 more, or 92,000 more.
We have a contract, so the amount is carved in stone.
Okay, but why doesn't the 606 match the 702?
Just because that was the amount that was in the budget. To be honest with you, that was probably under budgeted for even the 24 payment.
Roughly $100,000 difference between what was budgeted and what was actual, which is what we try to catch up.
Correct.
A little confusing, I think, to most of us is the transferring in and out of the other funds to make them whole. I may want to talk to you later because I don't understand the interdepartment transfers. If you're spending basically what you expected to spend, not sure how that relates to the interdepartment transfers unless they weren't giving you the right charge based on your typical expenses. I need to understand that better.
Right. I'm thinking we may have to have a larger conversation. I'm not sure it's just limited to this department.
Right.
So. If you could
Ask a short question.
Yeah, you may.
Okay. I'm just wondering, has the amount of federal money against which you could charge that 10% gone down?
Not really. We've had a lot of federal money coming through, as you can imagine, with the public assistance and hazard mitigation with all the flooding that we've had. The difficulty there is it's not as simple as how much federal money we're getting. We can't simply draw the indirect rate on all funds. Some of them have restrictions, and one of them being sub-grants and contracts. You can charge the cost rate up to 25,000 on those. And so anything above that we cannot charge the rate. So if you have something like the public assistance program where there's a bunch of really large dollar sub-grants, we don't charge very much of the indirect cost rate to those.
Things you want to tell us about this budget?
Madam Chair, I believe I've covered everything on the page. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to.
Yes, Harrison.
What I'm surprised, Rick, is to not see here. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. But with the renewed flooding last summer, obviously there's a lot of money that goes in and out of emergency management. And so I'm not seeing anything here for emergency management, one way or the other.
Yes, and that is a very good question. We had to use the excess receipts process to request additional spending authority. And that was already done. I think we did that about a month ago. And I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but I can get that to you offline if you'd like to see what.
Yeah, I would. I'm assuming you're talking about unspent ARPA money then, the excess receipts or no? No,
No, we needed more federal spending authority.
okay.
Any other questions for this? Okay.
Just one follow-up question. That 10% rate, is that a negotiable rate?
Our indirect cost rate is a negotiated cost rate. So we're not using I think the de minimis rate used to be 10%. I think they just changed that to 15. But our rate is a federally approved rate. It is a negotiated rate, and it has fluctuated from 15.5 to 25.3. So it's based on the ratio of our total direct cost base, which is things that go direct to programs. And then the things I mentioned that are attributable to all programs. So it's kind of a ratio of that.
I ask because, well, who's negotiating that rate? Do you
The
know?
Department of Public Safety. We submit it to FEMA, our cognizant agency,
Yeah.
and then they send it to somebody at Health and Human Services at the federal level because they typically review the indirect cost rates. And so then they'll look over all of it starts out as a calculated rate. We calculate what it is, and then they'll look at it and they may see some things. They're like, no, that's not really in there, and they chop the rate down a little bit.
Okay, thanks.
So did your indirect revenue increase because of the FEMA money?
It's really tough to say because there's so many different places that we draw the revenue. In 23, it was 3.1, and then 24, it dropped to 2.9. So it wouldn't seem so because I know in 24, we were spending a lot of the stuff for the 23 flood. And like I said, there's just so many sources that we draw from. It's really difficult to say. I could probably get some people to parse that data out for me to see where we drew each amount from, if you're interested in that.
I'm not seeing any other questions. So we thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having us, Madam Chair.
You know who your contact is, and we do too, so.
Right, and we can talk.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you both. So committee, a little extra time. I'm not going to go up with anything, but we're just coming back at 1:30, and we're going to start with the central office of the Agency of Human Services. Is there anything else anybody needs to?
We get this electronically as well.
Always on the committee page. And if you don't see it, you just have to refresh your committee page a lot.
Okay, the link, I tried the link and it kept giving me the message, it wasn't there.
If you go back to the main page and refresh it, and
Okay.
it should work. If I have to update a document once it's been posted, sometimes the original link breaks.
Excellent.
Going down and it's refresh.
Okay, I refreshed it too early.
Ahead of the curve. Okay. So, does anybody have anything else they need to bring up at this point?